Hey class, so if we were meeting in person, there'd be a couple of things I would want to talk to you about with John Donne's poetry because he has a lot going on, and not in a bad way. He has a lot of intense emotions, some beautiful imagery, but that sometimes we just need to be able to talk through it versus just reading and going. So you've already submitted your initial reader response to me, and now I'm going to try to give you a quick kind of like walkthrough of some of his poems. This video will focus on the Flea and a Valediction forbidding mourning, just to kind of give you some background. So as you can see, I have the Flea up. You can have your textbook out. This is a relatively short poem. It's only 27 lines, and it feels a little out of place. You're like, this is kind of, I've had many students be like, this is really gross. He's talking about a flea and like trying to compare it to like sexual relationships, like fleas are gross. I hear you. You're like, yeah, in modern society, we're like definitely disgusted by that. But I do want to make sure that you read the footnote on in your textbook that like the flea is not just the John Donne comparison. It was a popular theme all over Europe, and Ovid was like one of the original ones who starts writing about using a flea in a sexual way. Not, well, how fleas can be seen as sexual in a way. So yes, it's a little bit different, but it is there. And so as we read it, it talks about, and in this flea are two bloods mingled be. He goes on to talk about how swells with one blood made of two. And so it's really important to know that at this time, medically, the mixing of blood is what was considered to bring on pregnancy. So like in sexual acts, like your blood mixed, therefore you got pregnant. That's where these lines are coming from. So swelling with one blood made of two, our two bloods are mingling. That's where those lines are coming from. And like we know in the 21st century, that's not really quite how pregnancy happens, but it explains that a little bit more. And so then the speaker goes on talking to his lover, trying to convince her that like, don't kill this flea, and like, hey, since our bloods have already mixed, obviously it wouldn't be a big idea if we had sex together, because like it's already happening and it's great. And what's interesting about John Donne is both his romantic poems will engage with theological or religious comparisons, but yet then some of his religious poetry will have romantic seduction tones. So it's a very strange mix going back and forth, which is part of what makes John Donne. He uses unusual metaphors to make his conceits. So we see that some in here when he talks about the idea of the marriage bed or marriage temple. So you only got married in the church at this time. The marriage bed was where things happened, and it's what like it was supposed to be like kind of like a not sacred but like protected place for that. Cloisters and these living walls of jet, so like a religious cloister. And then this line of like, let not to that self-murder added be in sacrilege 3 sins and killing 3. So talking about like she's committing sins by denying this, and also like don't kill this flea, because there are 3 people in it, which is kind of a reference to the idea of the Trinity. So the God the Father, God the Son, and God the Spirit, which was a big part of Christianity. So then he's like, don't kill them, it's going to be sacrilegious. And he goes on, so with some other religious talking here. And we do know that she does end up killing the flea. And he's like, oh, well, you've already committed one sin by committing murder. Why not hop into bed with me and commit another sin? It's no big deal. So this is definitely a seductive poem. However, I want to make sure that you understood that this poem was written between the male narrator and his lover, who are familiar with each other. This is not some man talking to a random stranger, random girl, kind of like shouting out at her on the street, like, hey girl. Like, no, like this, the way it's written and like the meter and the form that it's using indicates the narrator and his lover were familiar with each other. So he wasn't trying to be a creeper. He was just trying to get his lover to fall into bed with him that day. And also one note is that he talks about how the flea is biting them. So some critics are like, hey, does that seem to say that John Donne thinks that maybe love can have some pain attached to it? Because it doesn't feel good to be bitten? No, you tell me. So then the other poem I just want to quickly walk through is this Valediction Forbidding Mourning. I think this poem is beautiful, and it's interesting that, you know, Valediction is a farewell poem, and yet in this he's saying, like, you can't mourn saying goodbye. When we think about goodbyes, they're normally bittersweet, right? We have, especially if they're going to be a long one, where you're going away on a long trip, you're never going to see them again, whatever it is, there's a little bit of that bittersweet. And he's saying, like, nope, the narrator is like, nope, don't mourn. So we start this conceit early, and it's going to give us this beautiful image of how they're like a compass, an old school compass, where you had, like, you know, the one prong that stays center and the other one like leans and turns and moves. And it's this beautiful image of how they are connection, and that even though the two prongs are separating from each other, they don't have to break apart because they're still connected at the top. So no matter how far that distance may stretch, they're still united and together. And it, like, you know, if here, let's just look at it together. If two they be, they are two so, as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. So one of them, you know, as they're connected, one is steady, even if the other is moving, it always brings them back. And though it in the center sit, when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as that comes home. So when you're falling apart, you're still like leaning towards each other, still being in. As you come home, you go back upright, which can mean two things. You're like back to normal, or can have a little bit more of a sexual undertone there for you. Such wilt thou be to me, who must like the other foot obliquely run. Thy firmness makes my circle just, and makes me end where I begun. So, like, you're going to be my center, and you're going to pull me back no matter where I've gone from. We do tend to believe that this is written from Donne to his wife as he goes about on this European tour. And so he's saying, like, you're back home at England, and you're going to keep me centered, and you're going to bring me home, and I will end where I begun with you. So this beautiful image of, like, true love can bend and move, and they keep each other anchored. But then earlier in the poem, he does make a note that dull sublunary lovers love cannot admit absence, because it doth remove those things which elemented it. So basically, lust can't survive distance, because lust is just based off being physically close to each other. And so therefore, again, like, their love is more than just lust. Their love is true, and it can withstand the time. It can withstand earthquakes. It can withstand anything like that, because they have true love grounding them and pulling them back together. Which is, I think, again, this beautiful conceit that Donne creates in here. Like, yeah, he's saying, like, don't be sad I'm gone, but the imagery behind it, I think, is quite beautiful.